The box! Heyo, boys and girls. I'm Josh, and I love to teach about art, creativity, and philosophy. Would you believe me if I told you that you could reconstruct pretty much everything you see with 3 basic building blocks? I didn't really believe it myself until I saw it demonstrated. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. Before we get straight into the demo, let's talk a little bit about what I mean by build everything. I'm not saying that you're going to be an expert artist once you can draw 3 basic forms, but understanding these forms is going to give you a little insight on how to mentally deconstruct, simplify, and then reconstruct what you see. Think of these form lessons as teaching you about the skeleton for anything you would want to draw, even skeletons. You're probably curious about what those forms are at this point. Well, they're pretty simple. The 3 forms that make up everything you see are the box, the cylinder, and the sphere. It sounds pretty limiting, but I'm going to show you some tricks with them. First, let's look at some common household items and see if we can deconstruct, simplify, and reconstruct those items.
Okay, so I just want to start with the simplest of simple things to deconstruct. Right here we have a coffee mug, and if we just focus on the mug itself and not the handle, deconstructing it is very simple. We end up with this cylinder. That's it. Don't worry about everything else you see there. It's just a cylinder, and that makes it so much easier to draw. Next up, we have something a little bit more complex, but it's still very simple. If we just think about the biggest forms on a light bulb, we end up with first a sphere, and then all we have to do to really turn it into a basic light bulb shape is add a cylinder. Super easy. And just to show you how we can apply this to more than just simple household objects, let's take a look at an arm and a hand. It ends up getting a little more complex because we have so many different forms to contend with, but when we think about it as a much simpler skeleton with basic geometric forms, we can deconstruct and reconstruct anything we see with just the basic geometric forms.
So that's pretty interesting, right? Now, those were some straightforward examples, except for like the human arm. But I want to go ahead and show you how to draw one of these basic forms, including a little bit of rendering, and we'll discuss some tweaks that we can make when it comes to more complex objects. So what is that form that we're going to draw today? The box! All right, this is really boring. Just stick with me through it and it will be okay, I promise.
All right, so this is a little bit of a longer demo, so I apologize in advance for that, but it's packed full of stuff for you, and I hope you enjoy. So I'm going to start off by doing a simple box, more of a cube, in 1-point perspective. So you'll use 1-point perspective whenever the face of an object is the closest thing to you, and all of the receding edges fade back toward 1 point. So these lines are parallel because this is the facing side of the box, and everything else looks like it's going to converge. These vertical lines will remain parallel, even in perspective, and the horizontal lines that are moving away from us are going to converge. I'm just cleaning up some of the spillover and darkening some lines. Don't be afraid to use your eraser, and don't be afraid to use the detail grip whenever you're going in to darken your lines. Also, you'll notice I'm rotating my pencil on occasion just to keep the tip of the pencil tuned and make sure that I always have a sharp point. So after 1-point perspective, we have 2-point perspective, and this is whenever an edge of a box is closest to you. So you'll still have vertical lines but all of the horizontal lines as they move toward a vanishing point will look like they're about to converge. So that's on both sides of the box because you have an edge instead of a face closest to you. And again, don't be afraid to clean up some spillover when you need to. And you can go ahead and darken the lines. Now imagine that the lines that are going toward the vanishing point extend beyond the box, and that'll make it a lot easier to draw. And one thing I always like to recommend, especially for beginning artists, is to draw through your forms. So imagine that you're drawing a wireframe basically, and draw the edges that you wouldn't normally be able to see. And all of the edges on the back side of the box that you can't see follow the same perspective rules. So they're going to converge with lines that look like they're parallel. Just imagine drawing those lines to the same vanishing points. And to clean up any of the lines where you've drawn through your object, you can either just go in with an eraser and lighten them, or you can build line weight on the edges that you actually can see on the object. Okay, so we've covered 1-point and 2-point perspective. Next up, it's probably pretty obvious, but we're going to talk about 3-point perspective. So with 1 point, you have a face that's closest to you. With 2 point, you have an edge that's closest to you. With 3-point perspective, it's when a corner or a point is closest to you. So you start with that point, and every line that comes from that point is going to be moving toward a vanishing point. So start with the 3 edges, not the corners, but the edges that are moving away from you, and then define your corners. From those corners, all of the edges that come off of the second set of corners from those axes are also going to move toward the vanishing points. And again, you can extend the lines and place vanishing points on your page if you need to. And remember, even from these corners, all of the edges are going to be moving toward another vanishing point. You end up with something kind of like this. Now, this looks a little more like a rectangle or an elongated box than a cube, so I'm just going to turn this one into a cube really quick so that we can stay consistent. This is about what a cube and 3-point perspective should look like. And just like with 2-point perspective, anytime you draw through an object, the wireframe on the other side of the object needs to follow the same rules of perspective. So that's rotating a box. Now, what happens if we want to do something a little different with a box, like stretch it out? Well, it's actually pretty simple. So I'm just going to do a longer rectangular box in 2-point perspective here. It follows the exact same rules, you just lengthen one of the sides. Now I could have done 3-point perspective on this box since we're above it, but I tend to reserve 3-point perspective for more extreme angles like bird's eye views or like a bug's eye view. 2-point perspective works perfectly fine for most applications. And again, this is not a perspective course, this is a basics course, so worrying about the finer details of perspective isn't what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to get the basic rules down so that we can start drawing from imagination quickly. I see a few lines in this box that are kind of bothering me, but the basic premise works just fine. So rather than stretching it out, what happens if we smash a box down? Again, it follows the exact same rules. You just shorten some of the edges and make sure that the lines are moving toward a vanishing point. Now, let's start doing a few more interesting things with boxes. So first, I'm just going to draw a pretty basic cube. And now I want to imagine what happens if we apply some pressure to the top of two sides of this box. That top face of the box is going to get more narrow, but the bottom should stay about the same. When that happens, we end up with more of this wedge type shape here. And if we take that to a further extreme, we're going to get an actual edge instead of a face on the top, which will give us sort of this roof shape. A triangular box. Now I want to go ahead and clean up some of my spillover and darken some lines, just so that everything shows up in the frame nice for you. And let's take this a step further. So let's apply pressure to two more edges of this box. Well, now, if we apply the same amount of pressure, the top should remain fairly square, but it's going to be smaller than the bottom of the box. Not even really sure what this form would be called. I mean, it's still a box. It's just a weird one. Of course, just like before, we can take this one to an extreme as well, but instead of an edge, now we get a point. And when we turn one side of a box into a point, we end up with a pyramid. Let's take a top-down view of this really quick so that you can really see what I'm talking about, because rendering will actually make all the difference in the world when you're drawing pyramids. Otherwise, it just looks like a weird diamond thing. So if we shade one side of it from more of a bird's eye view, that's what you end up with. Now last, I want to talk about what happens when we stretch and bend forms. So rather than just stretching a form out to make a rectangular box, or squeezing one of the edges to turn it into a triangular box or a pyramid, what we can do is actually take one of those edges and bend it around. Now again, you need to sort of consider the rules of perspective here. So as this face of this bended box gets further away from us, the top face is going to look more narrow. Let's go ahead and add the other face to the box that would be turned toward us because we're bending it. Again, I don't really know what this shape would be called, but you can do so many things with boxes. I guess this is sort of a horseshoe or almost a magnet shape, one of those goofy cartoon magnets. But the more you experiment with turning, bending, stretching, twisting, cutting these forms in your head, the more you're going to understand them and be able to use them for anything you see.
All right, now let's try to fix your brain with some exercise. Today, I want you to sit down, warm up, I'm sure you remember that video, put on some music, and start drawing boxes. Try rotating them, stretching them, bending them, cutting them, squeezing them. Whatever you can think of to do to a box on the page, do it. You can also find some box type shapes around your home, or maybe some boxes, and do your best to recreate those boxes from whatever angle you can place them. Just eyeball your measurements for now. We'll discuss visual measuring and sight size techniques very, very soon. But for now, just get into the flow of imagining and observing things that you want to put on your page. I recommend doing at least 50 boxes in all shapes, sizes, and angles for this exercise. Once you finish, you'll have a much better understanding of how useful a box can really be. Good luck on the homework. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you're new, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. And let me know what you think is the most challenging thing about drawing boxes in the comments down there. And until next time, be creative.